the last few days, I've thought that the Nottingham Forest game was a pretty pivotal one for David Moyes. But those are just my opinions. I know there's a lot of other people who think it doesn't matter what happens against Nottingham Forest, the board will retain him. However, one thing is clear, and that's that David Moyes certainly hasn't given off the vibe that this is an important game for him. On the contrary, actually, he's been very, very calm, I thought, in his pre-match press conference. It's not just the demeanour of the man, it's the words he's been saying. He's talking about David Moyes, he's talking about wanting to incorporate more young players. He's been talking about the future of Konstantinos Mavropanos. They're not really the words or really the subject matter of somebody that doesn't think he's going to be around next week. So maybe, just maybe, a lot of the people that are speculating that actually he has got another loss in the bag may well be true. However, I do think the context of the situation has changed, particularly with those that are drawing parallels and comparisons with last season, because there's a massive difference between this season and last season. And that is that last season, David Moyes still had another year. Well, at this point last season, had 18 months left on his contract, in fact. And last season, there was no director of football with a list of potential replacements for him, who was basically having a quiet word in the chairman's ear, allegedly. This season is very, very different. I also think there's the context of more investment being required in the side. And when I say required, Vanessa Gold has put 10% of West Ham's shares up for sale. There's been certainly suggestions from the main shareholder, David Sullivan, that actually they would encourage some more outside investment. And when you're going to do that, it's very important that you have a sort of stable Premier League status. So I do think the dynamics have changed between last season and this. Just to bring it back to football immediately now, Wolverhampton Wanderers beating Tottenham Hotspur is bad news for David Moyes. Absolutely, it's bad news for West Ham. Look, hey, good news for Manchester City, perhaps good news for Arsenal, good news for Liverpool. Bad news for West Ham, bad news for David Moyes, because what it actually means is tomorrow's game against Nottingham Forest, almost anything can happen. West Ham win, we can go 9th, which has obviously respectability about it. If we lose, we can go 16th. And let me just put that into context, what 16th means in this league. You're looking at the 3 promoted clubs plus Bournemouth are awful. They're awful. They've got 4, 4, 6 and 6 points, respectively. The next best is Fulham. Now, it's not beyond the realm. Basically, West Ham can go 16th. We could go 15th as well, but it ain't very good. Basically, out of all those terrible teams, West Ham would be the next best or the next worst, depending on how you want to phrase it. Placed against the backdrop of what I've just said, placed against the backdrop of a massive outlay on transfers. Yes, I know the books were balanced because we sold Declan Rice, but there is still money to spend in January, and it will be spent, I'm quite sure of that. Placed against the backdrop of the calibre of some of the players we have, and certainly the wages that they're on, it's unacceptable. And I think with that in mind, it's almost pointless looking at historical comparisons with regard to the manager's position, because very, very rarely have West Ham been in a position where we've just won a trophy, we're in Europe, we're the 7th highest wages spent in the Premier League, and there's all this investment coming in. We have 2 of our shareholders are billionaires. It just brings different pressure. It's not the same as somebody underachieving in the 80s or the 90s. Things are completely different now. And also the rewards are very, very different. Now, I know there's a lot that would probably consider that just staying in the Premier League will probably be good enough for the shareholders, but they want more. Tim Steidten was not brought in for this, I can assure you. And it just makes you wonder exactly how much pressure David Moyes feels on himself ahead of tomorrow. Now, let me just get this right. I do believe that West Ham are very, very capable of beating Nottingham Forest. I absolutely do. And in the preview, I predicted a draw, which I think will probably keep David Moyes safe. When I say safe, I mean safe in his job. West Ham are certainly safe. West Ham won't go down this season. There's no doubt about that. And I think if you were to ask me which team is most likely to win, I think West Ham are most likely to win. But there's nothing in it. In terms of the league, in terms of the teams, there's nothing in it. There's 1 point in it and there's 1 goal difference. But make no mistake about it, Everton winning is bad news for West Ham. Well, in fact, Everton played Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace are above West Ham, as I'm sure you know. Everton have got the same points as West Ham. There's 1 goal in it. West Ham lose tomorrow, then Everton will be above West Ham. It really is as simple as that. Nottingham Forest, of course, will go above West Ham. And it'll just be all these clubs who don't have anywhere near the wage bill that West Ham do are going to be above. And I just think it's going to create this massive, massive amount of pressure. Somebody mentioned to me in the comments, it was on Patreon, I think it was possibly Carl that mentioned it on Patreon. He basically said, do you think that David Moyes, or he thought that David Moyes was feeling the pressure with the two substitutes he used against Olympiacos? By that, it was Maxwell Cornet and, of course, it was Divine Mubama who came on. And it was and I couldn't help but agree with him, actually, because in almost every other game that would have been, or has been, Pablo Fornals and Danny Ings, who have been completely and utterly ineffective. Now, David Moyes normally takes a very, very long time to make a decision on anything, but it was either a case of he decided that enough was enough, or he probably understood the gravity of the situation which he found himself in. I don't know which it is, but he is in a really sticky situation tomorrow. And it's going to be very, very interesting. Certainly, being at the game tomorrow is going to be interesting. What the atmosphere is like. It's going to be incredibly important that West Ham start quickly. And I do wonder, a lot of things I wonder about West Ham is the repetition of what we do. And I would like to ask David Moyes this, because when I say get off to a quick start, I think for us to get off to a quick start, we're going to need the ball, and we're going to need to play the ball forward quickly, and not in the same way that we kick off. In almost every game I've seen under David Moyes, and we have kick-off, the ball gets played back and someone launches it forward. It's a long hoof forward in an attempt to win the header. I don't think it's to gain territory. I think it's to try and score an only goal. I don't think it's ever worked, ever. And it's something that we repeat time and time and time again. It's predictable. Everybody knows we're going to do it. And I think at the start of a game, it surrenders possession unnecessarily when we probably need to create a bit of pressure, to create some momentum, to have an early shot, to have the first shot. And it almost, unless somebody can tell me different, but the stats will be vastly stacked in favour of what I'm saying. Generally, it doesn't result in us having an early attack. Generally, it results in us giving the opposition the ball straight away, which I think is, a really silly thing to do. I really do. It's not the only thing that is predictable that we do. The long throws are very, very predictable. Funny enough, we did a short throw against Olympiacos. I was absolutely astounded, actually. Also, the in-swinger to the near post from James Ward-Prowse become very, very predictable. I'm to such an extent, I think an in-swinger to the far post that cause absolute havoc because nobody is expecting it at all. So I do think we're a predictable team. I think David Moyes probably needs to mix things up a little bit, even if it's not just in terms of personnel. Maybe the shape a little bit. It's the reason I've been saying swap wingers, even if you just do it for 10 minutes in every game at a certain point. Just give the opposition manager something to think about. I've got a feeling that Cooper will be quietly confident that he could make the team restless tomorrow. I don't believe the team will stop playing for David Moyes, by the way. I really don't. But there's another habit that we seem to have and another problem which always seems to be inherently predictable, aside from the game against Arsenal, actually, and that's the way we come out for the second half. It's become a cliche. I've said it so many times about lullabies and drinking Horlicks and whatever, sipping morphine-infused tea at half-time, that it's become so repetitive. It's probably sound boring to hear me say it, but that's how often that we're like that at half-time. It's really important that we start brightly and we come out after half-time brightly as well. It's important for West Ham. Look, none of us want another season where we're struggling. And you know what? There's a lot of people who say, well, hold on, we were in this situation last season and look what happened. It's a hell of a thing. And I guess you can use that as evidence. But I got 42 years worth of other evidence before that would suggest we're not going to go on and win a trophy this season. It's very, very hard to do, and it's highly unlikely. And just to be clear, I want West Ham to win the game tomorrow or today if you're watching this on Sunday. I think there was a slight overreaction actually to the win against Olympiacos. I thought Olympiacos are tough. Olympiacos have beaten in Europe, English teams in Europe in relatively recent times. They've beaten Man United, they've beaten Liverpool, they've beaten Tottenham, they've beaten Arsenal. They're nobody's force. That was a match against a wily Olympiacos team with a very, very bad referee, and they didn't have a single shot on target. Really, we should have gone into the lead after the third minute. We absolutely should have done, because Ben Rama should have passed it to Jared Bowen, who was free in the box. Agurd should have scored twice, maybe. Mavropanos should have scored, certainly. I would argue James Ward-Prowse probably should have scored when Jarrod Bowen... Look, my point is we had plenty of attempts on their goal. They didn't really have too many on ours. So I think ultimately to come away with the win in Europe and to be top of the group is fine and dandy. I don't mind. I actually, in many respects, I anticipate European games being exactly like that. I know it wasn't fun to watch. I know it wasn't great. I really don't, but I really do. I mean, it was pretty boring at times. Times we looked like we were lacking inspiration and we were toiling to try and break them down. But again, it's sort of the way I look at European games. And you know what? I'd rather take that than what happened to Liverpool and Man United in Europe the night before. That's for sure. But I do think this is different. I really, really do think this is a very different kettle of fish. There's a lot of people saying David Moyes can afford to lose this game. But if he does, and if Fulham were to get, Fulham just to get, a result tomorrow, then West Ham go down to 16th. That's it. And I think that's going to be a hard pill to swallow. Do you know what? Even 15th is not good. I think when you look off the back of the players that we've brought in, the money that's been spent, I think a 2-week international break is a really, really hard time for David Moyes to survive because it will be relentless. The negative publicity, the negative... And listen, I would include myself in that because what I'm meant to do is sit there and say, oh, everything's fine. David Moyes is doing really well. I don't think I'll be able to say that and I would be being disingenuous if I did. But I do think there'll be a lot of pressure. There'll be a lot of leaked stuff from the club and I think it'll be tough for Moyes. I don't know. But look, to be fair to him, he doesn't seem to be carrying that sort of demeanour at the moment, which I'm surprised because I did think he was going into the Arsenal game. I thought he was very, very spiky. Seems to have relaxed and chilled out a little bit. Maybe he knows something that we don't. But it's a big game. And I do think we can win it. And I do think that the team will play for him. And I think you know what, if we set our mind to it, I think we can score lots of goals. But I'll tell you something now. If West Ham go 1 goal down early on in that game, I sincerely believe it's going to be very, very hard to pull it round.